You probably spent more than 16 years of your life in school. But here's the thing. How many of those years actually help you learn how to think instead of just memorize facts? From the moment we started, education never really felt like a choice. It was something we had to do. You were handed a path: study hard, follow the rules, pass the test, move on. That was the formula. That was the definition of success. So you did it. You played by the rules. You did your homework, respected authority, followed the plan. Maybe you even crushed it. Great grades, a shiny diploma, a decent job. On the outside, everything looked right. But inside, maybe not so much. You're functioning, sure, paying the bills, showing up, keeping things on track. But when the noise fades, when it's just you and your thoughts, something feels off. It's that quiet voice that asks, who am I really? What do I even want? Why do I feel so disconnected after doing everything I was told would make me whole? This isn't just you. A 2021 survey from Pew Research found that over 60% of adults in the US, many with advanced degrees, have questioned the purpose of their lives. That's not a personal failure. That's a sign of something deeper, something systemic. Because the truth is, our education system was never designed to help us understand ourselves. It was built to make us useful, to train us to fit in, not to stand out, to follow instructions, not follow curiosity, to memorize, not question, to perform, not reflect. We were trained to become cogs in a machine, not explorers of our own minds. Sure, you might have succeeded by society's standards, but maybe deep down you feel like a stranger in your own life. You hit the goals, played the roles, but your inner world feels like a mystery. That's not an accident, it's by design. See, we were taught to function, not to understand. Nobody trained us to sit with uncertainty, to wrestle with big questions, or to even ask them in the first place. That kind of stuff, it doesn't fit on a test, so it gets pushed aside. And that's the cost of an education that's obsessed with productivity and performance. You come out of it knowing how to play the game, but unsure if it's even your game. You know how to impress others, but you never really learned what it means to impress yourself. And when the checklists are done, when the degrees are framed, and the applause fades, you're left with that uncomfortable silence. That tiny voice you've been ignoring for years finally gets a chance to speak. Is this really who I am? Is this really what I want? Or is this just who I was trained to become? This isn't just about the school system. It's about how that system shaped your entire way of being. It trained you to look outward for validation, for answers, for identity, while your inner world stayed untouched, unexplored, unasked. And now as an adult, you're left trying to piece it all together, searching for purpose in a life that was built around achievements, not understanding, around success, not meaning. That's the deeper lie. Not that school didn't prepare you, but that it never even meant to prepare you to understand yourself. Education could have been a journey of exploration. Instead, it became a system of control. Think back. You probably started school with genuine curiosity. You asked questions. You wandered off topic. You wanted to know. But the system wasn't built for wonder. It was built for order, for measurement, for standardization. Slowly, the spark faded. Not because you stopped caring, but because you learned that curiosity was a problem. Asking too many questions meant being labeled disruptive. Raising your hand too often was annoying. Going off script meant you were off track. So you adapted. You gave the answers they wanted. Memorized the facts. Stuck to the rules. You learned it was safer to fit in than to question. Easier to perform than to explore. Learning stopped being about discovery and started being about pressure. You didn't read because it fascinated you. You read because it would be on the test. You didn't write to express yourself. You wrote to check the boxes. Thinking stopped being creative and started being strategic. And here's the wild part. You were praised for it. You were called a good student not because you were original, but because you didn't rock the boat. You followed instructions. You didn't question the system. You were obedient. But if school rewards obedience over originality, what kind of intelligence is that? What kind of thinkers are we really producing? The philosopher Krishnamurti once said, "Real education means awakening the ability to think for oneself." And honestly, that kind of thinking is dangerous to a system that runs on sameness. Independent minds break the mold. They can't be easily standardized. They don't fit neatly into a box. So instead of teaching us to think, the system teaches us to copy. Instead of encouraging curiosity, it drills us with answers. And slowly, something inside us flattens. The kid who once asked why turns into the adult who's afraid of being wrong. The teenager who challenged authority becomes the employee who won't question policy. The curious learner becomes a silent follower. And we call that success? Is it really success if it kills our curiosity? Is it really growth if it shuts down our hunger to know, to feel, to create? Look back on your education. How much of it felt alive? How much of it felt connected to you, your passions, your questions, your story? And how much of it felt like a machine, assignments, grades, performance, pressure? The real tragedy isn't that we learned facts, it's that we stopped asking what those facts even meant. We were taught how to answer, but not how to wonder. We were trained to repeat, not to reflect. And that training didn't stop when school ended. We carried it into adulthood. Still afraid to ask too many questions, still waiting for permission, still measuring our worth by how well we perform, not how deeply we think. But maybe it's time to change that. Maybe real growth doesn't start with more learning, but with unlearning. Unlearning the patterns that told us not to question. Unlearning the belief that our value comes from output, not from presence. Unlearning the idea that success means fitting in. Real education doesn't start with answers. It starts with questions. And maybe the first question is, what do I actually believe? To understand how we got here, how education shifted from curiosity to conformity, we have to look at its roots. Because this system didn't just show up one day, it was built, carefully, intentionally, to serve a specific kind of world. Modern education as we know it wasn't born from a desire to grow thinkers or nurture passion. It was born during the Industrial Revolution, a time when society needed workers. Factories needed people who could follow instructions, stick to routines, and not ask too many questions. And so the school system was designed like, well, a factory. The bells that ring to start and end your day, that's not about learning. That's about conditioning. You sit in rows, follow strict schedules, get shuffled from subject to subject like clockwork, just like stations on an assembly line. What gets rewarded? Following directions. What gets punished? Creativity that goes off script. The goal wasn't freedom, it was control. Author Ivan Illich said it bluntly. School is the new church. Its dogma is conformity. And he wasn't wrong. Schools don't just teach knowledge, they teach belief. Belief in authority, in hierarchy, in systems that tell you where you belong and how to behave. Success becomes defined by how well you fit the mold, not by how boldly you break it. But it wasn't always like this. Before education became industrialized, learning was about discovery, about expanding the mind. It was about conversation, debate, exploration. It was messy, impersonal, and alive. But somewhere along the way, that aliveness got replaced by management. Think about it. The classroom doesn't just teach math or literature. It teaches you to be on time, to stay quiet, to raise your hand for permission to speak. It trains you in obedience. And for a while that model worked. It produced workers who kept the wheels of society turning, but it didn't produce people who knew how to think deeply or how to live meaningfully. The real damage? Most of us stopped seeing it. We accepted it as normal. We forgot that education could feel different. That learning doesn't have to feel like checking boxes. That school doesn't have to be a 17-year sentence where you wait to be told what to do. So we grew up inside a system that taught us to seek approval, fear failure, trust institutions more than our own instincts. It shaped our behavior before we even knew we had choices. It told us what to value before we could decide for ourselves. And we didn't question it, because questioning was never part of the lesson. This is the hidden history of our education, not a journey towards self-discovery, but a process of social conditioning, not a celebration of individuality, but a program built to produce uniformity. And when we finally leave that system, when the bells stop ringing and there's no more syllabus telling us what's next, we often feel completely lost. Sure, we're qualified. We've got degrees, certificates, maybe even a solid job. But when life throws something real at us, grief, uncertainty, a massive decision, how prepared do we really feel? Nobody taught us how to navigate the parts of life that don't come with instructions. We learned how to pass a test, but not how to ask ourselves what truly matters. We know how to meet deadlines, but not how to sit with doubt. We know how to plan, but not how to reflect on who is doing the planning and why. Psychology Today once reported that many adults experience high levels of anxiety when facing personal decisions. And not because we're incapable, but because we were never taught how to choose for ourselves. We're still waiting for someone to hand us the next assignment, the next approval, the next path. For years, someone else made those choices for us. What to study, how to define success, what goals to pursue. And we got so used to that, we now second-guess our own voice. We confuse accomplishment with self-knowledge, but they are not the same. You can earn a master's degree and still not know what brings you peace. You can win awards and still feel directionless. You can be praised for your discipline and ambition and still wake up wondering, whose life am I actually living? The truth is, the system taught us how to chase, but never how to question what we're chasing. It taught us how to move forward, but not whether the direction even makes sense. And so we keep going, checklist after checklist, milestone after milestone, hoping it will eventually feel like us. But in the quiet, we feel it. We're playing a role. And we don't remember how it started. This isn't just a personal problem. It's a deep psychological impact of a system that never taught us how to look inward, that gave us answers, but not the tools to ask the real questions. Think about this. No test ever asked, "What do you love?" No curriculum ever taught you how to process heartbreak or how to find purpose. No school ever rewarded you for forgiving yourself. But these are the things that shape a life. These are the lessons that matter when the rest falls apart. Without them, we drift. We become educated, but unsure. Accomplished, but unfulfilled. This is the shadow side of education. Not its failure to provide knowledge, but its failure to guide us toward wisdom. It gave us tools, but not meaning. It gave us structure, but not soul. And until we face that truth, we'll keep mistaking performance for purpose. We'll keep wondering why we feel so empty, even when we've done everything right. Sometimes, if you're lucky, or if life pushes you hard enough, you start to notice. A quiet, unsettling realization starts to take hold. That the beliefs you hold about yourself, about success, about what makes life meaningful, might not even be yours. It's like waking up from a dream you didn't know you were having. You look at your life and realize it wasn't shaped by conscious choices, but by programming. Invisible scripts handed down by a system you never asked for. Because education didn't just give you facts. It taught you how to think, or more accurately, what not to question. It handed you a model of success, of respectability, of safety, and you absorbed it so completely, it became your default. You don't remember when it happened, but at some point you started to fear being different. You avoided standing out. You learned to measure your worth by how well you blended in. Even now as an adult, that programming lingers. Someone lives outside the norm, and a voice inside whispers, "That's risky. That's not how life works." You feel uneasy without structure, lost when there's no next step laid out for you. You've been taught to crave the checklist, even when you don't believe in what's on it. And again, that's not your fault. It's decades of conditioning. Conditioning that said obedience equals intelligence. Routine equals safety. Productivity equals worth. We weren't just taught what to know, we were taught what to fear. We were told to fear silence, to fear uncertainty, to fear anything that didn't come with a gold star at the end. And now, we're waking up. Slowly, uneasily. We're starting to ask, where did these beliefs come from? Who do they serve? And do they still serve me? That's the beginning. Not a rebellion, not an escape, but a return. A return to yourself, to the questions that were buried, to the voice that was silenced, to the curiosity that was trained out of you. And that return, that's the real revolution. Once you start to see the programming, something inside you shifts. You realize the problem isn't that you're broken, It's that you were shaped by systems that never had your self-understanding in mind. And the journey ahead? It's not about fixing who you are. It's about reclaiming who you've always been, before the world told you who to be. You don't need to reinvent yourself from scratch. You just need to remember. Because now something in you has changed. You no longer want to just learn, you want to understand. You're done with collecting facts that mean nothing to you. You want to explore ideas that stir your soul. You want to read not to pass a test, but to feel alive. You want to write not to meet a rubric, but to give shape to your thoughts, to make sense of the chaos inside. You're starting to crave something deeper, not education as performance, but learning as a way to live more fully. And here's the most powerful truth. That kind of education doesn't start in a classroom. It begins with the questions you're finally willing to ask. Questions like, what do I actually believe? Why do I believe it? Are these ideas really mine, or were they just handed to me? By family? By culture? By school? What kind of life feels true to me, not just acceptable to others? These questions don't come with easy answers. They take time. They require silence, space, honesty, and courage. But the more you ask them, the more the invisible cage starts to dissolve. You stop fearing the blank space in your calendar. You stop needing constant structure to feel okay. You stop defining your worth by how much you produce. You start learning how to sit with stillness, how to tolerate the unknown. And in that space, something long buried begins to rise. A voice you used to hear, a curiosity you used to follow, a way of being that feels like home. And here's the beauty of it. This journey doesn't end with you. It becomes something you pass on. When you're raising kids, teaching students, mentoring others, whatever your role, you start asking different questions. Am I encouraging them to obey or to think? Am I preparing them for tests or preparing them to know themselves? Am I praising them for compliance or for courage? Because real education isn't about shaping people to fit into a system. It's about giving them the tools to shape their own lives. It's not about teaching them to play a role, but about helping them question whether the role is even worth playing. It's not about telling them what to think. It's about giving them the power to think for themselves, even if that path is messy, unconventional, or misunderstood. And the wild part? You don't need a classroom for that. You just need honesty and intention and the willingness to go first. She shows up in small choices, pausing instead of reacting, choosing truth over comfort, choosing awareness over approval. Because in the end, real education isn't preparation for life, it is life. It happens in the messy, unscripted, uncomfortable moments when you finally stop playing the role and start living as yourself. Not as someone else's version of you. Not as a product of expectations. Not as a projection of other people's fears or hopes. But as someone who has remembered how to feel, how to ask, how to choose. And maybe that's the most important lesson we were never taught. That we were never meant to just fit in. We were meant to wake up, to unlearn what no longer serves us, to return to ourselves. And that return? It's not loud, it's not flashy, it's not the kind of thing you get a certificate for, but it changes everything. Because when you return to yourself, you stop chasing meaning, you create it. You stop performing a life and start living one. And when you do that, you become a light for others. Not by giving them answers, but by showing them that it's safe to ask, that it's okay to not know, that curiosity is not a weakness. It's a doorway back to yourself. As we begin returning to ourselves, we start seeing just how much of our lives have been built around performance, around showing up the right way, achieving the right things, being the person others expected. We followed the plan. We got the grades, landed the job, hit the milestones. But then something happens, a life event, a quiet moment, a sudden shift, and the mask doesn't fit anymore. You realize that you've spent years climbing a ladder that might be leaning against the wrong wall. You did everything right, but you don't feel right. And here's the truth most people won't say out loud. It's entirely possible to look successful on the outside and feel empty on the inside. Because if your success is rooted in expectations instead of self-awareness, It's never going to feel like you. And that disconnection, it's not a personal flaw. It's a natural consequence of being raised in a system that prioritized conformity over consciousness, output over presence. We were trained to achieve, but not to pause, to solve, but not to reflect, to speak, but not to listen inwardly. And so even now, as adults, many of us are still performing. We don't mean to. It's just what we were taught. We smile when we're supposed to. We answer emails quickly. We measure our days in tasks completed. We even relax in structured ways because unstructured time feels unsafe. But when the performance stops, when the room is quiet, the calendar's empty, and no one's watching, something deeper begins to speak. That voice you've been ignoring, it doesn't ask for your resume. It asks, are you okay? Do you know what brings you peace? Are you living a life that feels like your own, or one you inherited without question? And most of us don't know how to answer because we never learned how. We were taught how to write essays, not how to name our feelings, how to analyze poetry, but not how to notice when we're disconnected from ourselves, how to make a 5-year plan, but not how to check in with our emotional truth. And so we wander, busy, exhausted, successful, and quietly lost. We look for answers in self-help books, online courses, productivity hacks, hoping they'll fill the space school never touched. But what if the answer isn't more doing? What if the answer is more being? What if success isn't about how much you produce, but how deeply you know yourself? What if the work isn't external, but internal? That shift from performance to presence isn't easy. At first, it feels like failure. Slowing down can feel like laziness. Resting can feel wrong. Not knowing can feel terrifying because for years, we were taught to avoid uncertainty. To be unsure was to be behind. To slow down was to lose. To pause was to be unproductive, and unproductive meant unworthy. But that's not truth. That's programming. And the moment you begin to see that, you can start to rewrite the story. You start to question the habits that no longer serve you. The ones that say you have to earn rest, that success must be visible, that your worth is tied to how much you hustle. And instead, you begin to trust something quieter. You begin to believe that your being is enough, that your inner world matters just as much as your outer results, that questions are as important as answers, that softness isn't weakness, it's wisdom. And from that place, you can begin to make different choices. You choose relationships that nourish instead of impress. You choose work that aligns instead of just pays. You choose practices that restore instead of numb. You start showing up not to prove anything, but to be present. And as you do, you realize something powerful. This presence, this awareness, this realness is what education was supposed to give us all along. Not just facts, but clarity. Not just knowledge, but wisdom. Not just skills, but a sense of self. The more you unlearn, the more space you create for that kind of growth. The kind that doesn't show up on a transcript. The kind that doesn't get you a promotion, but helps you feel whole. You begin to understand that true education doesn't end at graduation. It begins when you finally stop outsourcing your life to a system and start listening to yourself. And the best part? It's never too late. You don't have to start over. You don't have to burn everything down. You just have to begin, gently, honestly, intentionally, by asking, what's actually mine? What do I want to keep? And what am I finally ready to let go of? This journey back to yourself isn't about dramatic transformation. It's about truth. Quiet truth, the kind that doesn't need to be shouted or proven, just lived. Because once you've seen the programming, once you've felt the disconnection, and once you've started asking the hard questions, there's no going back to sleep. You can't unknow what you now know. You start noticing things, patterns, beliefs, expectations that used to feel like facts, now feel optional, questionable. You begin to see how often your decisions were shaped by fear. Fear of judgment, fear of failure, fear of standing out. You realize how many choices you've made, not from your core truth, but from a desire to be accepted, to be praised, to be safe. You recognize how often you've measured your worth in output, how rest makes you feel guilty, how uncertainty makes you anxious, how saying I don't know feels like weakness. But here's the thing, those aren't flaws, they're learned patterns. They were taught, conditioned, reinforced, and what's learned can be unlearned. You don't have to carry these old beliefs forever. You're allowed to release them, to rewrite them, to ask yourself honestly, is this belief still helping me? Or is it just keeping me stuck? Because when you finally begin to untangle yourself from what was imposed, something beautiful happens. You start to remember. You remember what it feels like to be curious, not to perform, but to explore. You remember what it's like to enjoy learning, not to impress someone else, but to grow for yourself. You remember what it feels like to create, not for a grade, not for approval, but just to hear your own voice again. That's not small. That's freedom. And from that freedom comes a new kind of clarity, one that doesn't rely on external validation. You begin to ask yourself questions that matter. What actually makes me feel alive? What would I do if I wasn't afraid of getting it wrong? What kind of life would feel like a reflection of who I truly am? These aren't just nice journal prompts, they're the real curriculum, the one we never got in school, the one that actually helps you build a meaningful life. And the answers? They don't always come quickly. But the act of asking, the commitment to stay in the question, that's where the shift happens. That's when you move from living by default to living by design. You stop needing the next gold star. You stop chasing applause. You stop playing a role and start becoming a person again. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be yours. That's what real education was always meant to be. Not a system of control, but a practice of awakening. Not a path to conformity, but a space for remembering. Because when you live as yourself, when you create from your truth, when you think your own thoughts, feel your own feelings, make your own choices, that's when you become fully alive. And maybe, just maybe, that's the lesson we were meant to learn all along. That you were never here just to fit in. You were here to wake up, to reclaim yourself, to live from your center, not someone else's script. So now the question becomes, what kind of life will you build now that you know it can be your own?